Who was the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him? Muhammad, peace upon him, was born in 570 in the city of Mecca, located in present-day in Saudi Arabia. He was a member of the Qurayshid, a merchant tribe. He was orphaned and raised by his grandfather and uncle. A few years later, he married a widow who bore him 4 daughters. His mission as Prophet of Islam began in 610 when he first received the revelation of the Quran in the caves near Mount Hira. It was there that he received the first of the 114 revelations that would become the sacred text of the Muslim, the Quran. The angel appeared to him and asked him, "Iqra" in Arabic, meaning read in the name of your Lord. And then the Prophet Muhammad accepted his revelation and mission. By these first words of the angel, Iqra, to read, the Islamic tradition always gave a great importance to the education and to the intellectual culture. The science, even secular, is very important in Islam and is not in opposition with the religion. So to revert to the subject of the revelation of the Prophet Muhammad, 3 years later, Muhammad began to preach. He attracted some followers, but his words of the one God, the unity of God, was not appreciated in Mecca, where most people worshipped idols and many pagan gods. Also, Islam was spoiling the supremacy of powerful chiefs. So they persecuted the Muslim community until Muhammad and his followers were forced into exile in 622 to Yathrib, the future Medina. The Hijrah, the immigration, which marks the beginning of the Muslim calendar. Then the Prophet Muhammad and the companions had to fight because they were persecuted. There were 2 very famous battles. The first one was called Badr, and in this battle the Muslims were victorious, and the other was called Uhud, and the Muslims lost. Finally, the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, could come back in Mecca and conquest the place again. He could also make a last farewell pilgrimage. Finally, he passed away at the age of 65. Peace upon him. In the Western world, we do not even ask ourselves if the Prophet Muhammad is a real prophet or not. By only 2 images, the Western person will not even dare to ask himself. Our soul will first say, Islam is for Arabic people, I'm not Arabic, and Islam is a violent religion. And that's it, it's finished. And the last blow is the image of Ramadan with this pale face and Muslim suffering while fasting. And so then the soul is like knocked out by Mike Tyson, and she will not ask any question again. She will not get up again and will not ask any question until the death. And especially in this modern epoch in the Western world, the goal of life is to have fun and to take good time until the death. And after the life, nothing. Some people believe and say that the Prophet Muhammad peace upon him, is a false prophet. So one day the Prophet Muhammad will have decided by himself to claim to be a prophet and to pretend to be a prophet by himself. So we will see in this video his achievement, and that a suprahuman force, a divine force, helped him, and this force is God. And then we will see for you, if you think that it's easy to be considered as a prophet, all the conditions, and we will see that it's very difficult. So the first conditions, if you want to claim that you are yourself a prophet, is that you must belong to an underdeveloped area. You cannot belong to France or United States. So for example, you belong to the Papua New Guinea, because the Prophet Muhammad was a man of the desert from an isolated and underdeveloped area. This area and Arabic people had a bad reputation of underdeveloped people. White Arabic people that had inner tribe conflicts and that could enter in war for the honor of their tribe. So if you want to equal the achievement of the Prophet Muhammad, you must belong to a tribe or be the chief of a tribe of Amazonia or Papua New Guinea. So we don't despise the Papua New Guinea tribes, but it's just to show you the context of the level of advancement in the time of the Prophet Muhammad. So to show you that your task will not be easy as you start from the bottom. In fact, God, by his wisdom, decided that the Prophet Muhammad, the last prophet, would not be from the Roman Empire or the Persian Empire. The two were the superpower and huge empire of his epoch. Thereby, his opponents cannot say, oh, Muhammad was belonging to a huge empire. So it was easy for him as he had all the ideal conditions. He had a cultural, political, scientist and military structure, but it was not the case like we know. So to revert to our subject, if you want to equal the accomplishment of the Prophet Muhammad and to be considered as a prophet, so you must come from Amazonia or Papua New Guinea, and your message must spread in the whole world, as nowadays the Muslims are 1.5 billions in the whole world. And all this while adapting in so different cultures like the Asian, the African, or even the European culture, as Spain and Italy were Muslims. And all this while keeping the prey in the native Papua New Guinea language. One of the difficulties to claim to be a prophet is to create it by yourself a divine, a holy book like the Quran. And the characteristics of the Quran are 114 chapters, 6,236 verses, 77,878 words, and 324,732 letters. And you must make this book why the other tribes want to kill you, as the Prophet Muhammad was living in a very stressful life and difficult context. And to complicate his task, he will not use a normal language, but he will use some rhymes like a kind of poetry. So it would be a very complex decision if he was not a real prophet. The Quran is composed of rhymes, but it's not poetry. It's beyond poetry. It's suprahuman. Thus, one of the poets that was an enemy of the Prophet Muhammad admit and said, "We are eloquent from childhood and from generation to generation, and we know all the styles of poetry. And we often challenge each other in battles of poetry. But this Quran, we cannot define it. It's like it's beyond poetry." End of quote. And also they were powerless to succeed in the challenge of God to produce even one verse equivalent to the Quran. And also another point is that your divine book that must be written in Papua Guinea language must be admired by who? By Victor Hugo himself. Thus, Victor Hugo was influenced by the Islamic civilization and wanted to know more information about its teaching. He admired the noble message of Islam as he wrote many poems praising the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him. Among numerous poems that wrote Victor Hugo about Islam and the Prophet Muhammad, one of them is entitled by the title "One Verse of the Quran." This poem is inspired by the chapter 99 of the Quran, the Zalzala, meaning the earthquake. And also another poem showing the admiration of Victor Hugo for the Prophet Muhammad is entitled "The New Year of Hijr, L'an neuf de l'Hégire," about the year of the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Islam is the religion for the whole world for the last era. This modern era is characterized by a rationalistic and Cartesian mindset. So if we think rationally, isn't it very amazing that a man from the desert, impressed by his divine book, a so great poet like Victor Hugo? So then your divine book written in Papua Guinea language nevertheless is beautiful, but also must contain a penal code and a complete constitution. And this penal code and this civil constitution must be equal to the modern constitution like the US civil constitution or the French penal code. And this penal code must be admired by the great Napoleon Bonaparte, as Napoleon Bonaparte admitted to admire the Quran. Thus, Napoleon said, "I hope the time is not far off when I shall be able to unite all the wise and educated men of all the countries and establish a uniform regime based on the principle of the Quran, which alone are true and which alone can lead men to happiness." End of quote. And also, according to the French historian Gustave Le Bon, who was atheist, so we cannot suspect him to have a biased opinion. According to him, the Code Napoleon, the Book of Napoleon, was inspired by the Quran, as he noticed that some laws of the Napoleon Code were the exact copy of laws present in the Maliki school, one of the 4 Islamic schools of jurisprudence. As a Cartesian person, don't you think that it's unbelievable that Napoleon Bonaparte himself take the book of a man of the desert to elaborate his own empire? Yourself, would you be able nowadays to elaborate a book in Papua New Guinea language? that would be able to influence and inspire the great political leader of this current epoch, like Putin, Obama, Merkel, or Chavez? Then, to equal the achievement of the Prophet Muhammad, you will have to have a list, a great number of scientists of all the world that would testimony that your book written in New Guinea Papua language will contain some scientist phenomena that would be discovered only 1,000 years after your book. Because the Quran contains some scientist phenomenon that were discovered only in the 20th century. For example, this is the words about the Quran of Maurice Bucaille, a French surgeon that was an authority in his field.
My explanation are enough for everybody one who is objective and sincere to say the Quran cannot be the work of a man. Are enough for everybody one who is objective and sincere to say the Quran cannot be the work of a man.
So he said that the Quran could not be the work of a man, meaning that it was a divine revelation and it was a divine work. And he said in his book, The Bible, the Quran and Science, what amazed me when I start such a text, meaning the Quran, it was the abundance of the subject, the huge number of scientist subjects treated, like the creation, the astronomia, the universe, the animal kingdom, the vegetal kingdom, or the human bodies and other subjects. The number of subjects is really impressive. While in the Bible I saw many astronomical scientist mistakes, in the Quran I was surprised that I didn't find any. So I asked myself, how a man who lived in the 7th century AD could discover and know some scientist phenomena that were discovered only in the 20th century. Which human explanation can we have? I think there is no human explanation, as there is no reason that an inhabitant of the Arabic Peninsula could have a scientist culture ahead on his epoch of 10 centuries. Another point is that we don't find in the Quran some wrong scientist phenomenon that occurred in the epoch of Muhammad. It means that if Muhammad had gathered all the best famous scientists of his epoch, it should have in the Quran some mistakes due to some wrong scientist opinions that always occurred in any epoch and that are recognized as wrong far later, centuries later. I will put the link of the other great scientists that made a testimony of their astonishment about the Quran.